In news coming in from the defense sector, Canada is reconsidering America-built F-35 purchase. This is big news. Remember, mulling over talks with the rival aircraft makers as well. The decisions come while there are clearly tensions between US and Canada.
Canada is facing a historic decision. Cancel the $13 billion USD F-35 contract and choose a European partner. So, what is driving this bold move by the country? Since 2017, when Donald Trump started implementing protectionist trade policies, tensions began to form. One of the biggest shocks was the US imposing tariffs on steel, aluminum, and agricultural products from Canada. These tariffs caused severe difficulties for Canada's industries. Specifically, Canada could not ignore the trade barriers introduced by the Trump administration, such as requirements on agricultural products or restrictions on steel exports. Furthermore, these decisions were not just economic losses, but also increased Canada's dependency on a single country, the US. This forced the Canadian government to ask a big question. Can we continue to rely on such an unfair partner when we could find other, more reliable partners?
Canada has reached an agreement to acquire a fleet of 88 new F-35 fighter jets. Defense Minister Anita Anand spoke about the $19 billion deal this past hour. She said it's the largest investment in the Royal Canadian Air Force in 30 years, and that this acquisition will create many economic benefits for Canada.
This is a turning point decision. Signed in 2023, the contract to purchase 88 F-35s from the US was a key part of Canada's strategy to modernize its air force. However, the recent trade tensions have forced Ottawa to reconsider this agreement. The $13 billion USD F-35 deal is not just a typical arms procurement, but also a symbol of the cooperation between the two nations. But in the current context, is it still reasonable for Canada to continue working with the US when Trump's tariffs and trade decisions are increasingly pressuring Canada's economy? With the F-35 primarily produced in the US, Canada faces a big question. Should they continue to depend on a country with such strong protectionist policies or seek alternative options from Europe? The US, of course, is not happy with this news. They have continuously emphasized the importance of defense cooperation between the two nations, especially with the F-35, which is the US fifth-generation fighter jet. Washington reacted strongly, stating that Canada's decision to cancel the contract could damage the special relationship between the two nations. Canceling the F-35 deal not only affects the defense relationship between Canada and the US, but also has far-reaching effects on various industries and the Canadian public's reaction to US trade policies. Specifically, this decision could alter the structure of Canada's defense, agricultural, and steel industries. The US tariff policies, especially the tariffs on steel, aluminum, and agricultural products from Canada, have caused significant damage to these industries. Canada, especially provinces like Ontario and Quebec, relies heavily on steel and aluminum exports to the US. And Trump's decisions have put businesses in a difficult position. Canadian farmers have also been heavily impacted by the US imposing tariffs on agricultural products like milk and beef. This policy has not only reduced profits in these industries, but also created economic instability in Canada, as businesses face rising costs and the loss of export markets. A large portion of the Canadian public has expressed support for shifting towards other partners, particularly in Europe. They believe that if the US continues to impose unfair tariffs, seeking alternative partners is essential to ensure the nation's independence and sustainable economic growth. Canada not only wants to maintain its relationship with the US, but also wants to assert that they can stand on their own and do not need to depend on another country. Stay tuned and keep watching, because the upcoming developments will leave you unable to look away. Will Canada choose to change direction or continue to stay tied to the US? Canada breaking away from the US? Europe becoming the new partner? In 2025, trade between Canada and the EU has surged by over 50% in just 6 years, while trade relations with the US have hit rock bottom for the first time in decades. Canada's Prime Minister has not chosen Washington as his first official visit. Instead, he went straight to Europe. Is this the moment Canada finally steps away from America's influence? Trade war. The US slaps Canada with tariffs. Once one of the strongest trade relationships in the world, Canada and the US are now locked in a trade war, and it all started with Washington's aggressive tariff policies in 2025. February 1st, 2025. The US imposed a 25% tariff on most Canadian imports. March 11th, 2025. The US doubled tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum to a staggering 50%, sending shockwaves through global metal markets. For Canada, it was an economic nightmare. But Ottawa wasn't about to sit idly by. March 12th, 2025, Canada strikes back, announcing a 25% retaliatory tariff on $21 billion worth of American goods. And this time, it wasn't just symbolic. Canada hit back where it hurts, targeting steel and aluminum, crippling U.S. exports, consumer goods, from processed foods to household items. High-tech products, a massive industry between the two nations. For the first time in modern history, Canada is showing that it no longer relies on the U.S. for economic survival. And this is where things get even more interesting. Europe, Canada's new strategic partner. In a shocking move, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney skipped Washington altogether in his first official trip and went straight to France and the UK. Why? The CETA trade deal, Canada-EU trade agreement, has boosted Canada-EU trade by over 50% since 2017. The EU is now Canada's third largest trade partner, only behind the US and China. Canadian exports to the EU have soared 46.4% since 2016, giving Canada more options than ever before. Mark Carney himself made it crystal clear. Canada is the most European nation outside of Europe. And it's not just about trade. Canada's pivot to Europe is also about military power. Canada joins Europe's military alliance. A shift in global power? Canada isn't just looking to Europe for economic strength. It's also making big moves in the military sphere. Some major developments. Canada joins the EU's PESCO military project, allowing faster troop movements across Europe. Canada leads NATO forces in Latvia, solidifying its role in defending Europe from external threats. Canada expands intelligence sharing with the UK, boosting cybersecurity and economic warfare defenses. For the first time ever, a non-EU nation is participating in PESCO, proving that Canada is now an essential player in European security. The message is clear. Canada is no longer looking only to the US for global leadership. The US reacts, but is it losing control? The White House is not happy, and Washington is pulling every trick in the book to pull Canada back. The US has threatened higher auto tariffs, targeting one of Canada's biggest exports. Major US corporations have been pressured to reduce business with Canada in a move to apply economic leverage. But here's the problem for Washington. Canadians are done with America's tactics. A February 2025 Abacus data poll reveals 68% of Canadians view the EU more favorably than the US. 44% believe Canada should even consider joining the EU, something unthinkable a decade ago. For decades, Canada was America's closest ally. But now, the numbers don't lie. Canadians are looking for a new future. Final question: will America keep Canada or lose it forever? Canada's shift toward Europe is not just about economics, it's a geopolitical earthquake. The US is rapidly losing its grip over a nation it once considered an unshakable ally. So the real question is, can Washington turn the tide? Or is Canada already gone? The next moves from Washington and Ottawa will determine the future of North America. And trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Canada has just canceled the F-35 deal. Portugal has also withdrawn, and now a move that could change the North American defense landscape.
Comes just 2 days after a similar decision by Portugal. In January 2023, the Trudeau administration had signed a contract with Lockheed Martin to purchase 88 F-35 fighter jets.
Canada has just grabbed the world's attention by deciding to cancel the $19 billion USD deal to purchase 88 F-35s from Lockheed Martin, a deal they signed in 2023. And it's not just Canada. Portugal has also announced its withdrawal from the F-35 program. These two countries are now seeking alternative defense solutions, no longer depending on the US, and aiming for independence in protecting national security. The reason for canceling this deal is directly tied to the trade and political tensions between Canada and the US, especially under the leadership of Donald Trump. With protectionist policies and severe tariffs, reliance on the US for defense is no longer a safe option for Canada. For Portugal, the decision to withdraw from the F-35 program is equally significant. Portugal's defense minister, Nuno Melo, pointed out that the instability in US foreign policy under Donald Trump has made it impossible for them to continue pursuing the plan to acquire these fighter jets. The country is now seeking replacement fighter jets while building a more flexible and independent defense force, reducing dependence on traditional partners. So, if it's not the F-35, then which fighter jets will replace them in Canada's defense strategy? One of the most promising options right now is the Saab J-39 Gripen, a product from Sweden. Saab has proposed building the Gripen in Canada.
There's a legal commitment to buy those. But another jet is being talked about a lot, which is the Saab Gripen. That was the runner-up in the long procurement process to get these F-35s lined up. And they'd committed to make more.
Which would help transfer technology and develop the domestic defense industry of the country. This is a great opportunity for Canada to gain more autonomy in equipping its military and defense systems, while maintaining strong cooperation with NATO countries. While Canada is looking for these alternative solutions, the country's defense industry is also growing strongly. Canada has a defense industry that contributes about 10 billion Canadian dollars annually to the economy and creates more than 64,000 jobs. Companies like General Dynamics Land Systems in Ontario and CAE Inc. in Montreal are supplying essential military products for Canada's armed forces and government agencies. The Canadian government is also accelerating domestic defense technology development programs, aiming to reduce dependence on international partners. On the other hand, the shift in Canada's defense strategy is not just an internal shift, but also reflects a broader trend in global military relations. The European Union, EU, with countries like Germany, France, and Italy, has increased defense spending by more than 30% from 2021 to 2024, reaching approximately 326 billion euros by 2024. Europe is now looking to reduce reliance on US military systems, while promoting autonomy and developing advanced defense technologies. The EU's Rear Europe Initiative, which is expected to raise up to 800 billion euros to invest in defense, shows Europe's determination to achieve strategic autonomy in military systems. Canada is also working strongly with European countries in developing alternative defense solutions and sharing technology. The military cooperation between Canada and European countries is becoming an important part of Canada's defense strategy, helping create a more independent and flexible defense force. Along with this, European countries are also intensifying initiatives to ensure defense autonomy, reducing reliance on external partners outside the region. Stay tuned for more exciting developments to come. Trump's press conference, confusing statements on economy and policies. Donald Trump's latest press conference was shocking. His vague, misleading, and illogical statements have left the economic community and international allies deeply concerned. What did Trump say? And why could these statements have major consequences for America? Let's break down each key point. Vague statements on economy and unemployment. At the press conference, Trump completely dismissed concerns about mass layoffs in the public sector. He declared, "The job market is going to be fantastic. We will have higher-paying jobs." But what do the real numbers say? Unemployment rate increases. February 2025. The unemployment rate rose to 4.1%, higher than the forecasted 4.0% and the previous month's 4.0%. Job creation falls short of expectations. February 2025. The U.S. economy added only 151,000 jobs, falling short of the expected 170,000 jobs and below the 166,000 job monthly average in 2024. Public sector layoffs, Social Security Administration, SSA. Plans to cut 7,000 employees, more than 12% of its workforce, reducing staff from 57,000 to 50,000. Department of Veterans Affairs, VA. Plans to cut over 80,000 jobs, bringing the workforce below 400,000 employees. On what basis does Trump claim the economy is fantastic? Is this just political rhetoric, painting a picture far from reality? Confusing statements on environmental policy. Trump insisted that environmental regulations are hurting America. He stated, "We need to remove these ridiculous environmental barriers. Cutting down trees is the right way to prevent wildfires. But does this actually help?" In reality, Trump's administration is cutting funding for wildfire management agencies. The worst wildfire-prone areas don't need deforestation, but rather ecosystem conservation measures. Is Trump's administration genuinely trying to solve the issue, or is this just an excuse to benefit the logging industry? And who really profits from these decisions? Lack of transparency in trade policy. When asked about the impact of new tariffs on consumer prices, Trump responded, "There might be a little disruption, but it'll be fine. We need an economic detox to break free from government dependency." But what does detox even mean in economic terms? Could this be the administration preparing the public for an upcoming recession? Meanwhile, Trump's economic advisors made contradictory statements. Some officials support tariffs, claiming they protect American manufacturing. Yet many businesses warn that tariffs are raising production costs, directly hurting consumers. Previously, Trump proudly used stock market performance as proof of his economic success. But now, as the market declines, his administration says it's actually a good thing? So, what's the truth? Misleading statements on government spending and debt. During the press conference, Trump boasted about reducing government spending, stating, "We're cutting wasteful spending and making America financially stronger." But does the data support this claim? U.S. national debt continues to rise. As of March 2025, the U.S. national debt surpassed $35 trillion, an increase of over $3 trillion since the start of Trump's new term. Interest payments on the debt have hit record highs, consuming a larger share of federal revenue than ever before. Contradictory spending cuts. Trump claims to be cutting wasteful spending, yet military spending increased by 8%, while social programs faced major cuts. The IRS budget was slashed, despite studies showing that enhancing IRS enforcement could generate billions in recovered tax revenue. If government spending is truly being reduced, why is the national debt still rising? And who actually benefits from these spending priorities? 151,000 new jobs, but there's something very wrong about this number. And no, this is not a good announcement. Let's start with the recent jobs report. The U.S. economy only created 151,000 new jobs, far below the expected 200,000 jobs. This is truly a shock, especially when we're still not fully recovered from the pandemic and inflation is still pressing hard on everyone. This report only covers up to February 15th, and more importantly, it doesn't include the 10,000 government jobs cut, a number we'll see more clearly in the full report in March. But don't forget, what's happening now is the result of policies that have caused millions of workers to lose their jobs, including thousands of jobs in the manufacturing and service industries. When you look at it, this number doesn't just reflect the job market. It also reflects the weakness of Trump's economic policies. This economy is now struggling to keep pace, like a ship unable to ride the waves, without a steady helm. And unless there's a clear change, we could be facing a challenging future, possibly even an economic recession. So, when Trump was questioned about the tariffs, what happened? In an interview with Maria Bartiromo,
I think so, but the tariffs could go up as time goes by, and they may go up, and I don't know if it's predictable.
Trump gave a vague response about continuing to raise tariffs. Tariffs may go up over time, he said, but he didn't provide any clear plan for the businesses struggling with this uncertainty. CEOs have asked for clarity because they need to plan for investment and spending. But Trump only gave confusing comments about globalization and America's thieves. This doesn't just leave investors confused. It also creates an unpredictable atmosphere in the economy. The economic detox story initiated by the Trump administration is really just a big joke. They're trying to say that the current difficulties are just a detox process, like a temporary strategy to cleanse the body after harmful effects. Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, used this term in a recent interview, saying the economy is shifting from public spending to private spending, and it will have to go through a painful temporary phase. But ask a regular worker how they feel about this detox process. when they're struggling to pay bills and keep their job. The truth is, the term detox is just an excuse for failure to address fundamental economic issues. When we look at the financial situation, the instability is clear. Reports from companies like Costco show a decline in consumer spending, and we haven't even touched on the collapse of the stock market. The banking sector, with names like Citigroup, Morgan Stanley, and JP Morgan, has seen a serious drop in stock prices, with indices falling between 7 to 12%. This only makes one thing clearer. While the wealthy continue to hold on to their assets, the majority of Americans are still struggling with rising living costs and instability in employment. Finally, what concerns us is the international position of the U.S. under Trump's leadership. We're seeing an increasingly noticeable alienation from our traditional allies, and some countries like Poland are preparing for the possibility of war. This not only causes the U.S. to lose crucial international relationships, but also creates a world full of risks and uncertainty. Trump's foreign policy isn't just ineffective, it's isolating us. We're no longer the leading superpower on global issues. And now, we're being pulled into dangerous relationships with countries like Russia and North Korea. And this becomes even more serious when countries like Poland and other allies have to prepare to face the possibility of war. While the U.S. stands on the sidelines, no longer a solid foundation for international alliances.